wanted to move on kind of to Arsenal, but it touches on Everton. We all know that Everton could be facing another points deduction. I wanted to ask you, if they are facing another points deduction, a lot of the stories coming out is they could face a fire sale this month and have to move players on. Arsenal have been linked with Onana. I read your piece via Give Me Sport the other day that Onana is open to that move. Could you see this deal taking place later this month if Everton are forced into a position because of more charges and points deductions from the Premier League?
Well, I think, first of all, the appeals process will give us more of a clue in February, and Everton are quite confident that the independent panel that hear their appeal will actually reduce the points deduction. And their argument is basically that there were interest payments on their new stadium that have been declared in the loss column, and the Premier League, they say, told them that interest payments would not be considered. And then they changed their mind, and the independent panel said that they had to be factored in. So Everton kind of believe that if they win that appeal in the first case, then there's overlap with the second set of charges, again, framed around interest payments that have taken them over the threshold. And if they can argue successfully that those interest payments should not be considered and there's a grey area in the rules, then the sale of Richarlison balances the books. And then Everton maintain that they'll be absolutely fine. So then they believe that they'll get their points back or less points deducted. Now, if that's the case, then they're in a slightly different position. So they can let this window shut, potentially wait until February and then assess their business in the summer when they know what division they're in and what the punishment is. So I don't see a fire sale in the next few weeks. I think with Onana in particular, the Arsenal interest is genuine, but it's nothing more than that at this stage. I'm not aware of any talks taking place between Arsenal and Everton for Onana. And even if Everton are to be, in some ways, financially motivated to try and bring in money, I still sense that it's out of Arsenal's budget in this window, because they paid 33 million for Onana to Lille, and the asking price would be at least 50 million. And some sources say 60 million. So even if you came down to 40 million, then that's still 40 million that Arsenal have to find, that they couldn't find to buy David Raya outright. And Everton will not be interested in doing some long-term deal structurally to the benefit of Arsenal. They'll be interested in either bringing in money if they are forced to sell, and there's denials at Everton's end that will be the case, or more importantly, they'll be valuing staying in the Premier League even in a season where they may be docked a bunch of points. And do they need the players they've got to do that? And what is it worth to them, even with a points deduction, to stay in the Premier League? And to do that, keeping Onana is probably more valuable until the summer versus selling him. So I think that Onana will leave in the summer, but I would be surprised if he goes in 2024.
Yeah, I hear you on that. In relation to Arsenal, again, a little bit like Chelsea, it feels very quiet. They're obviously looking at options and possibilities, but it does appear they're flying close to the wind on FFP or profit and sustainability more so. The Premier League are showing their teeth on that. What's your understanding of the latest goings on at Arsenal, and can they expect any incomings at this particular moment in time, Ben?
They can certainly strengthen, but I think someone will have to leave. And if, for example, they want a striker, then Eddie Nketiah would have to go first. And Arsenal prefer at the moment to keep Nketiah and then have that depth, because they believe that the right kind of striker they're looking for isn't available in this window. And that, to me, makes, I think, a lot more sense. Because it's the same point as we said with Chelsea. You don't just want to buy for the sake of buying. Otherwise, you end up spending the money and then not having the right name. So Arsenal could move for a forward, but only if the right name became available. And I still think that they may look very seriously at Ivan Toney in the summer, or even for free agency in 2025. But I think they're well aware they can't get him for under 100 million in this window. You've got Joshua Zirkzee as well, who's being looked at by a couple of clubs. Manchester United and Arsenal are the two that have maybe made the most serious kind of inquiries. And again, it looks like that's going to be one from Bologna that is more likely in the summer than in this window. I'm also told that the release clause that is widely reported for Xerxes, which I think is 40 million euros, is only applicable to Bayern Munich. It's not something that a Premier League club can just activate. And again, it comes in the summer, not in January, and it's applicable to Bayern because they're the club that sold him to Bologna in 2022. It's unlikely that Bayern would look to trigger that clause because they only ultimately got rid of him a year and a half ago, and they've got Harry Kane. But Eric Choupo-Maxim Moting could go, and that might be something that sort of frees up a little bit of space. Like Choupo-Moting was really good last season for Bayern. So that's another possibility, not for Arsenal, but for Manchester United. But it may be that Bayern would like to persuade him to stay a bit longer, even at 34, for the kind of depth that he brings. But now Kane's come in, there's definitely a window of opportunity for like a player like him to go somewhere. So I think that there'll be inquiries for a few of these strikers, but I think that we're going to need a merry-go-round of movement first before anything happens in the last 2 weeks of the month. So if one goes, then a club needs a forward, and then they suddenly move for their forward, and you get a kind of flurry of activity. But if a lot of these names, Guirassy another one, he's at AFCON, he's got a release clause, Manchester United have considered him as well. If one big club moves for that type of name, then it might set in motion a sort of domino effect, and that's what we have to wait and see. But if it doesn't happen, then I don't think we'll see that many big name strikers or informed strikers on the move in January. I think alternatively, we will see maybe more a midfield plot line to end the window, a resolution one way or the other to the Conor Gallagher situation. And Calvin Phillips is another one that I'd be staggered if he doesn't go between now and the end of the window. And actually, I'm told that even though Newcastle have been linked consistently, they've never opened talks. We know Roy Hodgson has said that Crystal Palace are genuinely interested, but I would keep an eye on West Ham, because I'm told that at the moment, it may actually be West Ham United that are emerging as the front runner there. So I think Arsenal will be quiet. I think Liverpool will be quiet. I think Chelsea will move for one or two, a left back, maybe a striker. I think Tottenham will still look for a midfielder. I think that Calvin Phillips will be the big plot line as far as Premier League to Premier League transfer is concerned. And then we wait and see with some of these older players, like we've already discussed, the Benzemas, the Firminos, Henderson on the move to Ajax. But other than that, it might, unfortunately, for many that want it to be more exciting, prove to be quite an underwhelming window.
It certainly feels that way. It certainly feels that way. And maybe, as you stated already, if there is a Man United saying Guirassy as an example, and Arsenal think, well, we better act. Or suddenly, if an Arsenal summer target, somebody looks to move for him now. So I'm pretty sure if somebody put a bid in for Ivan Toney, and that is a number one target for Arsenal in the summer, that could, make them look at their financial situation, borrow some money. I don't know what they would need to do, but there doesn't seem to be very much happening at all. Another player at Everton that's linked with a potential. I want to actually mention an Arsenal exit. Could Smith Rowe be on his way to Villa? It's what a Villa fan, 1982 has got to ask here. Could he be one of the exits that maybe raises some money for Arsenal?
Yeah, possibly, but I don't think they're looking to sell in order to buy at this stage. I think that they're genuinely just feeling like the right targets are not available. Smith Rowe kind of divides opinion, because I think a lot of the Arsenal fans feel like he's come through their academy and they'd like to see him given more opportunities, but the Villa interest is genuine. It hasn't gone anywhere, and as a consequence, I think we can't rule that out. Arsenal might, as you say, have to move a couple of players, but there is interest in El Neni from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. They could hypothetically cash in on Thomas Partey at some point in 2024. He also gets a lot off the wage bill as well, rather than only obviously bringing in a fee. So then that leaves the possibility that it wouldn't be reliant on Smith Rowe. We've already mentioned Nketiah. If they find the right target, he can go as well. So I don't think it's a case of having to sell Smith Rowe. I think it's a case of assessing it should an offer arrive, rather than actively, if you like, in inverted commas, transfer listing him. But I still think that there might be a twist with Smith Rowe. The Villa interest hasn't gone away. We also know that Arsenal like Douglas Luiz. So is there any possibility of trying to do something where there's a two-way movement there? I think it's tough purely because Villa are flying. So even if they wanted Smith Rowe, I would be staggered if they allow Douglas Luiz to go in this window. I'd also be surprised if Zubimendi is allowed to go to Arsenal, even if he wanted to. And there's no indication that he does at this stage, because Sociedad are doing really well. And I think he's quite settled and is enjoying his time there. So again, this outlines the challenge that if I was to list you the Arsenal targets right now, I would say Zubimendi and Luiz, 100% they would take them if they could. And I would say that they would probably move for Ivan Toney if the price was right, because he's exactly the kind of profile that they're looking for. So you've got three big targets there, and I wouldn't rule out two midfielders coming in. And then I think it's obvious that they want El Neni out. Partey, I think they would consider. Smith Rowe, I think they would consider. And Nketiah, I think they would consider. But that might all have to be something that they think about in the summer, because what's the point in allowing depth to leave, even if it's financially beneficial, if you can't replace in the next 2 weeks? Otherwise, all you've done is lose squad depth. And in doing so, if Arsenal end up fading, and there's such a fine margin now between winning the Premier League and finishing 5th or 6th, because it's really, really tight. And 5th is not 100% guaranteed Champions League football. So if Arsenal fade and somehow didn't get Champions League football, didn't sign Zubimendi, didn't sign Luiz, didn't sign Toney, etc., 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 but let a Smith Rowe or a Partey go, then the fan base is going to turn around and say, we've done it again. We've somehow finished the season with less depth than we started the season with. So I think Arsenal would have to line somebody up before they allowed that kind of transfer that you mentioned.
Yeah, Liz, I agree. I think that I understand Arsenal fans that say we're not doing enough. They say we're not buying enough. We're not doing enough now. I also understand a train of thought that I hear from other Gooners, which is, well, if our main target is not available into the summer, we shouldn't buy somebody who is substandard now just to sort of fulfill the fans. But at the same time, you end up finishing 5th or 6th this season because you didn't sign anybody or you let depth go. They've got to get this right, Arsenal, because at the moment their fan base is a bit of a tinderbox right now. It could go up at any moment with the way they're all feeling.